The broken voice echoed through the kitchen like a muffled scream. Thomas froze in the hallway, his hand still on the doorknob of the office door. It was almost 10 at night, and he thought he was alone in that huge, silent mansion. But that desperate crying coming from the kitchen made him stop. "I don't know what to do anymore, Joanna. My mother is dying. She just wants to see me happy before she goes, but how am I going to show up at Letitia's wedding alone again? You know what my family is like." Thomas recognized the voice immediately. It was Ayanna, his housekeeper for 3 years. He had never heard that woman cry. In fact, he had never paid much attention to her. Ayanna was just a silent presence who kept his house spotless, who left the coffee ready every morning, who disappeared when he arrived. He should have gone on to the office. He should have pretended he hadn't heard anything. But something in that desperation held him there, invisible in the dark hallway. "I need a boyfriend for tomorrow," Ayanna sobbed on the phone. "I know how ridiculous this sounds, but you don't understand. My mother lying in that hospital bed, holding my hand and saying she just wants to see me with someone before closing her eyes. And my whole family will be there judging, whispering, treating me like I'm less because I'm 35 years old and alone." Thomas felt something strange tighten in his chest. He was 48 years old, with a fortune of almost $1 billion, 3 companies in his name, and he was completely alone. But no one had ever judged him for that. On the contrary, they called him a successful bachelor, a man focused on business. "No, I can't pay someone. With what money? Everything I earn goes to my mother's medicine and to help my father." Ayanna's voice was heavy with shame and exhaustion. I just wanted for one day, a single day, for my mother to see me smiling next to someone. Even if it's a lie." The silence that followed was heavy. Thomas could hear her broken breathing, the sound of a glass being placed in the sink. He looked at his own hands that signed million-dollar contracts, but that hadn't touched another human being in months. Maybe years. When was the last time someone needed him? Not his money, not his signature on a document, but him as a person? Ayanna hung up the phone and Thomas heard her crying alone in the kitchen. A low, controlled cry, as if she were afraid of bothering someone even though she was alone. That broke something inside him. He knew he should leave. He knew he was invading her privacy. But instead, Thomas found himself walking into the kitchen, and for the first time in 3 years, he really looked at Ayanna. She was sitting on the chair near the window, her face hidden in her hands. Her dark skin glowed under the soft kitchen light, and Thomas realized he had never noticed how beautiful she was. Not a magazine kind of beauty, but something deeper. A tired beauty, of someone who carries the world on her shoulders and still gets up every day. When she lifted her eyes and saw him standing there, terror crossed her face. Ayanna stood up too quickly, knocking over the glass that was on the table. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't know you were home. I was already leaving, I heard," Thomas said, and saw all the color drain from her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invade your privacy, but I heard." What he did at that moment would shock everyone who knew him. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down in front of her, something he had never done with any employee in his entire life. "Tell me," he said in a voice he barely recognized. "Tell me about your mother. About the wedding. About everything." And for the first time in 48 years of life, Thomas Anderson decided to truly listen to someone. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave in the comments what you're thinking and which city or country you're watching from. Your interaction helps other people find stories that touch the heart. Ayanna looked at the man who paid her salary, that stranger who lived in the same house she cleaned every day, and something inside her broke. Or maybe it opened. She no longer knew. The words poured out of Ayanna like water from a dam that had finally given way. She talked about her mother, Dona Beatriz, a strong woman who had worked her entire life as a seamstress and who was now wasting away in a hospital bed with terminal stage cancer. She talked about her younger sister, Letitia, the perfect daughter who got everything right: college, a stable job, a fiancé from a traditional family. "My mother always dreamed of seeing me at the altar," Ayanna said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "But I chose to take care of her when she got sick. I quit my job at the school, gave up my apartment, gave up everything. And men, they don't stay when you become a full-time caregiver. They disappear." Thomas listened in silence, and every word was like a punch to the stomach. He thought about all the times he had passed by Ayana in that house without really seeing her. How many mornings had she arrived with swollen eyes from crying, and he hadn't even noticed? How many times had she cleaned that enormous mansion while carrying a weight he had never imagined? The wedding is tomorrow, Ayana continued, her voice trembling. And my entire family will be there. My aunts who always ask when I'm going to get married, my cousins who joke saying I'm married to my job, my grandmother who prays every Sunday for me to find someone. She gave a bitter laugh. And my mother will be there in a wheelchair, looking at me with those eyes full of hope that kill me inside. Thomas stood up and went to the cabinet. He took a bottle of whiskey that cost more than Ayana's monthly salary and poured 2 shots into crystal glasses. He slid one toward her. I don't drink during work, Mr. Anderson, she said automatically. You're not working right now, he replied. You're talking to me. Drink. Ayana took the glass with trembling hands and took a sip. The liquid burned her throat, but it was a different kind of pain. A pain that distracted. How many years have you worked for me? Thomas suddenly asked. 3 years, sir. And how many times have I asked how you were? The silence answered for him. Ayana lowered her eyes, embarrassed, but Thomas went on. I built an empire, he said, looking at his own glass. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But this morning, do you know what I did? I woke up, had breakfast alone, went to the office alone, ate lunch alone, came home alone. And tomorrow it will be exactly the same. And the day after tomorrow too. He looked at Ayana, and there was something vulnerable in his gaze that she had never seen before. You need a boyfriend for tomorrow, Thomas said slowly. And I need to remember what it's like to be human. So I have a proposal. Ayana felt her heart race. She didn't like the tone of that. How many stories had she heard of rich bosses making indecent proposals to maids? She started to stand up, but Thomas raised his hand. It's not what you're thinking, he said quickly. For God's sake, it's not that at all. I'll be your boyfriend tomorrow. Just pretend. I'll go with you to the wedding, I'll meet your family, I'll make your mother happy. And then it's over. We go back to our normal lives. Ayana was speechless. Of all the things she imagined could happen that night, this wasn't on the list. You're serious? Completely. But why? You don't know me. You don't know my family. Why would you do this? Thomas took a moment to answer. He looked around the enormous kitchen, with its state-of-the-art appliances he never used, its marble countertops that had never seen a family meal. Because I heard you crying alone in my kitchen, asking for one day of fake happiness, he said with brutal honesty. And I realized that I live an entire life of fake happiness. At least yours has a purpose. Mine is just empty. He stood up and held out his hand to her, as if they were closing a deal. So, do you accept? Ayana looked at that outstretched hand. The hand of a billionaire who could have anything in the world, but who was offering the only thing that really mattered, presence. She thought of her mother, of the smile that would light up that tired face when she saw her arrive at the wedding with someone by her side. But something didn't make sense. Why would a man like Thomas Anderson do this? What did he really want? And more importantly, what would happen after the charade was over? With trembling hands, Ayana shook his hand. And at that moment, neither of them imagined that this decision would change everything. Morning arrived far too quickly. Ayana had barely slept, tossing and turning in bed and wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. At 7 in the morning, her phone rang. It was a message from Thomas. I'm waiting for you. We have a lot to prepare. When she arrived at the mansion, Thomas was different. He had traded his impeccable suits for dark jeans and a navy blue cotton shirt. He looked younger, more approachable. But there was still something in his eyes that screamed money and power. This isn't going to work, Ayana said as soon as she saw him. You look exactly like what you are. A billionaire. My family will figure it out in 5 minutes. Thomas smiled, and Ayana realized it was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. That's why we need to rehearse, he said. Sit down here. Let's start from the beginning. How did we meet? They spent the entire morning creating a story. Thomas would be a businessman, yes, but from a small technology company. No private jets or mansions. They would have met at a cafe Ayana used to go to before work. He would have accidentally spilled coffee on her, bought her another one, apologized, and that's how it would have started. How long have we been together? Thomas asked, writing everything down in a notebook as if he were planning a corporate merger. 6 months, Ayanna replied. Long enough to be serious, but not so long that they ask why I never talked about you. Thomas stopped writing and looked at her. Why did you never talk about your life to your family? The question caught Ayanna off guard. She looked away. Because every time I said I was alone, they looked at me with pity. And I got tired of being the poor thing of the family. The one who sacrificed everything, the one who never worked out. Sometimes it's easier to just not talk. Thomas understood that better than she imagined. He also had a family that saw him only as dollar signs and business opportunities. And about touching, he asked, changing the subject. Couples touch. They hold hands, they hug. We need to look natural. Ayanna tensed up. Thomas noticed. Look, he said gently, I know this is strange. You work for me, there's a huge power difference here, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. If you want to back out, I completely understand. But Ayanna thought of her mother. She thought of those tired eyes that still shone when they talked about love and family. She thought of what it would be like to see that smile one more time. No, she said firmly. I need to do this. Just go slowly, okay? Thomas extended his hand slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. When Ayanna placed her hand in his, they both felt something strange. A small shock, almost imperceptible, but it was there. They rehearsed all day. Thomas learned the names of every member of Ayanna's family, memorized stories from her childhood, understood the complicated dynamics between gossiping aunts and heavy-drinking uncles. Ayanna, in turn, learned false details about Thomas's life, about the small company he claimed to have, about the hobbies he pretended to enjoy. But in the middle of the rehearsals, something real began to surface. Thomas talked about the mother who died when he was 15, and how he had never been able to truly connect with anyone after that. Ayanna talked about the father who worked 3 jobs and whom she barely saw growing up, and how that made her value every second with her mother now. You're a good person, Ayanna, Thomas said suddenly, in the middle of the afternoon. Your family is lucky to have you, even if they don't realize it. No one had ever said that to her. Ayanna felt her eyes fill with tears and quickly turned her face away. When 5 o'clock arrived, Thomas went to the bedroom and came back with 2 boxes. Inside one was a simple but elegant navy blue dress, exactly Ayanna's size. In the other, a pair of medium-heeled shoes, comfortable but beautiful. How did you? She began. I paid attention, he said simply. You always wear blue on your days off. And I know your shoe size because I saw it on the tag of your boots in the entryway closet. Ayanna held the dress against her body, feeling the soft fabric between her fingers. It was perfect. Discreet, but it made her feel beautiful. Special. Thomas, she said, using his first name for the first time. Why are you doing all this? Really? He took a while to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with an old sadness. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt needed. Not for my money, not for my company, but for me. And that's worth more than you imagine. Ayanna's phone rang. It was her sister. I can't wait to meet this mysterious boyfriend tomorrow. Mom can't stop smiling. Ayanna and Thomas exchanged a look. There was no turning back. Tomorrow, they would walk into that wedding together, and everything would change. The reception hall was decorated with white and gold flowers. Ayanna felt her stomach churn when Thomas's car pulled up in front. It was an ordinary car, a discreet black sedan that he had rented especially not to draw attention. Even so, she could feel the curious looks through the windows. Breathe, Thomas said softly, placing his hand over hers on the seat. I'm here. We've got this. When they walked in holding hands, the entire hall seemed to freeze. Ayanna saw her mother, Dona Beatriz, sitting in her wheelchair near the main table. Her thin, pale face lit up in a way Ayanna hadn't seen in months. Tears began to run down the older woman's face. My daughter, Dona Beatriz whispered when Ayanna knelt beside her. You brought someone. You really brought someone. Thomas bent respectfully and took the woman's fragile hand. It's an honor to meet you, Dona Beatriz. Ayanna speaks of you with so much love that I feel like I already know you. His voice was genuine. There was no pretense, no falseness. And Dona Beatriz, who had spent her life reading people, saw something in that man's eyes that surprised her. She saw kindness. She saw respect. "Take good care of my girl," she said, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "She deserves all the love in the world." "I know," Thomas replied, and there was truth in those words that even he hadn't expected. But not everything was peaceful. Aunt Marta, the older sister of Ayana's mother, approached with a fake smile plastered on her face. "So you're the mysterious boyfriend," she said, her eyes scanning Thomas from head to toe. "Funny, Ayana never mentioned you before. Suddenly she shows up with a man at her sister's wedding. How convenient." Ayana felt her blood turn cold. She knew that tone. Aunt Marta was starting. "What's your last name again?" the aunt continued. "What do you do for a living? Where do you live? How much do you earn?" "Aunt, please," Ayana began, but Thomas gently interrupted her. "I understand your concern," he said calmly. "If I had a niece as special as Ayana, I would ask questions too. But what I earn or where I live doesn't matter. What matters is that I wake up every day grateful for having found a woman who taught me what really matters in life." He looked at Ayana with an intensity that made her heart race. "She taught me that wealth has nothing to do with money. It has to do with waking up and having a purpose. It has to do with loving someone more than you love your own comfort. Your niece is the strongest person I've ever known, and if you can't see that, then I'm sorry, but you're not paying attention." The silence was absolute. Aunt Marta stood speechless. The other aunts stopped gossiping. Even the music seemed to fade. And then Dona Beatriz began to clap, slowly, with her fragile hands. Other guests joined in. Ayana felt tears streaming down her face. "Come," Thomas whispered, pulling her toward the dance floor. "Let's put on a show for them." The music was slow, an old song about true love. Thomas placed his hand on Ayana's waist, and she placed her hand on his shoulder. They began to dance, and for the first time in 3 years working in the same house, they truly looked at each other. "You didn't have to do that," Ayana said softly. "Defend my honor like that." "I wasn't defending your honor," Thomas replied. "I was telling the truth. Every word was true." Ayana's heart beat faster. She looked into his eyes and saw something that frightened and warmed her at the same time. This was no longer pretending. This was real. "Thomas, I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm feeling it too. And I don't know what to do with it." The music continued, and they danced closer and closer. Everyone's eyes were on them, but they could only see each other. That was when Dona Beatriz stood up from her wheelchair. Everyone was in shock. She was so weak, so sick, but somehow she found the strength. Swaying, she walked to the dance floor and placed her hands over both of theirs. "I can go in peace now," she said, tears of happiness running down her face. "I can go knowing that my daughter found someone who truly sees her." Ayana broke down. She hugged her mother and cried, and Thomas held them both, this man who a week earlier didn't know how to hug anyone. "I love you, Mom," Ayana sobbed. "So much. So much. And I will always love you, my daughter. Always." In that moment, the farce ceased to exist. What was there was real, raw, true. Thomas realized that he had come to that wedding thinking he was doing an act of charity, but in reality, he was the one being saved. The drive back was silent. Ayana stared out the window, lost in thought, while Thomas drove carefully. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but neither of them could appreciate it. They were too busy processing what had happened. When they arrived at the mansion, Thomas turned off the car, but neither of them moved. They sat there, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of what was not being said. "I should go," Ayana finally whispered. "It's late." "You're not going," Thomas said, his voice firm but vulnerable. "Please. Don't go yet." Ayana turned to look at him and saw tears in his eyes. Thomas Anderson, the billionaire who built an empire, was crying. "I spent 48 years building walls," he said, his voice breaking. "Walls of money, power, and loneliness. I thought I was protecting myself. But today I realized I was only imprisoning myself. And you tore it all down in 2 days." Ayana felt her own tears fall. She took his hand. I'm scared too, she confessed. Scared that this is just a moment. Scared that on Monday you'll go back to being my boss and I'll go back to being the invisible housekeeper. Scared that everything we felt today was just part of the lie we created. Thomas squeezed her hand tightly. Then don't let it be a lie, he said. I don't want it to be a lie. I want to wake up tomorrow and have breakfast with you. I want to hear about your day. I want to know your dreams, your fears, everything. Not as boss and employee. As two people who found each other in the middle of emptiness. Ayanna smiled through her tears. But what about my job? And what will people think? And none of that matters, Thomas interrupted. You can keep working here if you want, or you can do something else. I can help you go back to teaching if that's still your dream. Or you can do nothing for a while. We can figure it out together. But what I can't do is pretend I don't feel what I'm feeling. He touched her face gently, as if she were made of glass. Ayanna, for the first time in my life, I feel truly alive. And it's scary and confusing and makes no logical sense. But it's real. And I don't want to let it slip away just because it's complicated. Ayanna closed her eyes, feeling his hand on her face. She thought of all the times she had felt invisible, of all the nights she cried alone, of all the moments she believed she would never truly be seen. My mother told me something before we left the wedding, she said softly. She held my hand and said she had finally seen what she had been waiting to see for years. Not a boyfriend. Not a ring. But my eyes shining again. She said I had come back to life. Thomas smiled, that rare and genuine smile that transformed his face. Then maybe we were both just surviving until we found each other. They got out of the car and entered the mansion together. But this time, it was different. Ayanna didn't enter through the back door. She walked in through the front door, hand in hand with Thomas. In the kitchen where everything had begun, Thomas made tea for the two of them. They sat together at the table, talking until dawn about everything and about nothing. About childhood, about regrets, about dreams they had forgotten they had. And when the sun began to rise, painting the kitchen with golden light, Ayanna realized something. She had spent 3 years cleaning that house, but only now was she truly living in it. I'm still scared, she admitted, resting her head on his shoulder. Me too, Thomas replied, kissing the top of her head. But maybe some things are worth being afraid of. 3 months later, Dona Beatriz passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. At the funeral, she was buried with a photo in the pocket of her dress. Ayanna and Thomas at the wedding, dancing, with genuine smiles on their faces. Their story was not perfect. There were challenges, judgments, difficult moments. But they faced everything together, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely place, shared loneliness. Thomas learned that true wealth was not in his bank accounts, but in small moments. In shared breakfasts. In genuine laughter. In the touch of hands at the end of the day. And Ayanna learned that being seen was not about proving her worth to others, but about finding someone who saw her exactly as she was and chose to stay. If you made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Tell us in the comments what you thought of this story and which city or country you're watching from. Stories of true love need to be shared, and your interaction helps other people find hope too. Sometimes, all we need is someone to hear us cry in the kitchen. And the courage to accept the hand extended in the dark.